Yes. Well, I'm really excited about tonight. It's fantastic to have Judy with us. Hello, Judy.
Good evening, everyone.
I'm really excited about this. I want to explain what's going to happen tonight because just within the last, well, even today, but certainly in the last couple of days, we found out that Judy has been instructed by a doctor to rest her voice for 2 weeks, I think it is, and not to speak for longer than 10 minutes at a time. So we thought she was going to speak for an hour and a half, but that won't be happening. But we've got all kinds of wonderful things and some treats to regale you with. So Judy is going to speak for 10 minutes. Then we're going to have a video, which she suggested I play. And then she's going to speak again. Take question and answers after the little video, which is I've cut back to 23 minutes. And then she's got a doctor coming to see her in an hour, less than an hour now. So she may have to go before that. But we'll carry on with, we've got some video recorded question and answers. So Judy will be answering questions. We've got we were talking about Gerry Jampolsky just now. We've got a wonderful short video on Judy's relationship with Gerry and the healing of that. And it's really good. It's quite touching, actually. And then a special treat. Many of you won't ever have heard the voice of Helen Schucman because I think there's only one recording in existence. And we're going to play it. So towards the end of the evening, I may offer some reminiscences of my own with Judy, about Ken, about Gerry, whatever. I'm not really sure what there'll be time for, but hopefully some of that, and then some final sharing at the end, about around 9. So that's the program. So okay, I'm doing the screen share. So I'm going to play a little introductory video, which is just 3 minutes, and then Judy will speak to us about whatever the Holy Spirit guides her to speak to us about. Hang on a minute. Oh, I didn't set the video up. I'm sorry. So let me just give me a second. I thought I was prepared, but I'm not.
When A Course in Miracles was given to me, I was at a critical point in my life. A few days before, I actually had an emotional breakdown. I realized everything in my life was really fine. I was lucky. I was blessed with a marvelous family, 2 healthy growing children, a beautiful place to live, a wonderful career, and I felt empty. Just absolutely empty, desolate. As I was weeping, I heard myself say, "Won't someone up there please help me?" And I said it a few times. "Won't someone up there please help me?" It was only a few days later I met Dr. Helen Schucman and Bill Thetford. They worked together at Columbia with a tremendous amount of tension and hostility around them. Their own relationship reflected this. There was a lot of sniping, backbiting, there was heavy-duty criticism and judgment, and it wasn't very pleasant. One day, after a particularly difficult meeting, Bill turned to Helen, and he did something very unusual. Bill gave an impassioned speech in which he said that they just couldn't seem to be at peace with each other. And he finally ended it up, and he said, "There must be another way. There must be another way." And he really meant it. And to his surprise, instead of ridiculing him, Helen put out her hand and she said very sweetly, "I don't know what the other way is, Bill, but I'm determined to help you find it." And that to me was the critical juncture of 2 human beings who came together to find another way of being in the world.
It was almost as if Helen had waited her whole life for that moment. She had really written God off and written Jesus off. At the point when all this happened, she would have dreams that were very, very pregnant with meaning. The figure of Jesus began to appear. It was very disconcerting to her. And the culmination of all this was an October evening.
Helen was sitting at home, and she heard very clearly, "This is A Course in Miracles. Please take notes." She called Bill, and he said, "Well, why don't you get out one of your notebooks and take down what it says? And she said, well, what if it says something irrational or crazy? He said, bring it in the morning. We'll lock the door and pull down the shade, and you read it aloud to me, and I'll type it up. And if it looks crazy, we'll throw it away. And that first night, what she took down in peace and in quiet was the introduction to A Course in Miracles. This is A Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the Course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. The opposite of love is fear. But this Course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God.
Something struck me that was not only beautifully written, but it had a very, very powerful message. And I felt a real connection with it. I very quickly changed all my plans. This was my life's work.
I knew it was true for me, and I knew that this was the help that I needed. It spoke to me. After the text was finished, Helen began to scribe the workbook for students, which has a lesson a day for 365 days in order to practice the principles in the text of A Course in Miracles. And after that, very quickly, was dictated the manual for teachers, not for a teacher outside to teach someone else, but rather to turn to the inner teacher.
So it doesn't really need me to say much about Judy, except to say that she's the founder of the Foundation for Inner Peace, which is, and the chairperson, or chair, what do you call yourself? Chair lady or something, chairwoman of the Foundation for Inner Peace since the mid-1970s. And I think every Course in Miracles student owes a tremendous debt of gratitude to Judy for all the work and the dedication that she and her team have done all those years. So I'm really happy to hand over now, but strictly prescribed 10 minutes to Judy Skutch Whitson.
Thank you, Ian, so much, and welcome all our friends, because you all are part of our family too. It's wonderful being able to speak to you in probably my second favorite country in the world. I would choose to live where you all are if I didn't live where I am. And I think it's wonderful for everyone to have at least a second other place to know that, well, if all fails here, I can go there, hopefully. At this particular time, of course, of our COVID pandemic, so many people have been writing to us and calling about how in the world they can use the Course at this time of life, which is so threatening to so many and so fearsome. And one of the things that we answer uniformly, because we all do deeply believe it, is that we absolutely must take the Course seriously if that is our way. Because the Course tells us this world is not real. Now look how real it seems. Of course it does. A dream seems very real indeed, but not when you awaken. And it's our role, our path here, while we see ourselves in the reality that we call the dream, or the dream that we call the reality, is to keep on asking for the help of the Holy Spirit within, or if one wants to call it higher guidance, or if one wants to call it internal teacher, doesn't really matter what we call it, it's there anyway. And ask in each situation where we feel fear, how can I turn this fear into love? Show me, so that I can have the miracle of that experience and thus share it with everyone else. So I would like to do something I've never really done before, which is I'd like to ask you to be with me right now in saying my favorite prayer, or thinking it, or just imagining the words and letting them go into you. and close your eyes just for a few moments. This is what I say, by the way. I don't know how many times a day, and I have it hanging on my wall besides. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent He who sends me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do, because He who sends me will direct me. I am forever, ever in the depth of my feeling for the Holy Spirit, who helps me heal as He teaches me to heal. In that sense, we know if we start our day with something, and there are many different places, and of course you can memorize for yourself, that mantra becomes empowering. And even though we're tempted so many times a day to fall into fear, to fall into despair, we see people all around us, and we may be that ourselves, who have lost their jobs, who have members of their family who are ill, who can't reunite with their family. We're just about the day after tomorrow to have our United States of America big Thanksgiving. And that is, even in a way, bigger than Christmas in this country. And I'm having it just alone with my daughter. And we were feeling the ache of not having our family with us when all of a sudden we said, Zoom. And so we sent everyone an invitation, and we let them, my son does this work very well, and he lives across the country, to invite the whole family at a certain time of day to Zoom so we can all be together on Thanksgiving. And I'm almost as excited about that as I used to be about the family gathering in my home. In fact, probably even a little more. I don't have to cook. I don't have to clean up either. Of course, nearing 90, I don't really do that anymore, but I still remember how many years I did. I do want to apologize to you for my voice, which is showing my age, and has to start resting itself because I tend to overtalk. So if you're an overtalker, learn from me now. Cool it. Try not to do it as much. I ask for guidance, of course, all the time, because after all these years, and it's been 45 years, if I'm not in the habit of doing that, I might as well throw the book away. So I asked about this, and there's no way I wanted to disappoint my friend Ian after I told him how delighted I would be to be with you. And then I realized, I don't think I can make it. And I was feeling guilt. Of course, don't we all? The ego attracts guilt immediately. And I stopped and I asked for help. And I said, please show me how to make this all win. And I came up with, which I hadn't thought of before, the fact that there are a few videos out there, most of which you probably haven't seen, that are clear enough to be able to say to you exactly what I would have said anyway. After all, it hasn't changed. So I hope you will forgive me for this. And if there's anything in it that you don't get or you would like to get, then afterwards we'll have a little time to do this. One of the things I wanted to touch upon, and I mentioned it just now to Ian in the group, but I think I'd like to tell the rest of you, because you will see Gerry Jampolsky in a small video that we did together, because we wanted really to commemorate to ourselves our very long relationship. The instant after I left, Helen and Bill and Ken Wapnick was there too, from Columbia University School of Physicians and Surgeons, where I had been in their private room, and they had given me the 7 heavy black thesis binders, which contained the manuscript of A Course in Miracles. I started to drive home, and I stopped the car. In those days, no cell phones, and there was a phone booth, and I went to the phone booth and I called Gerry. I mean, that's how close we were even then. He lived 3,000 miles away from me, but we had so much in common. We had seen each other often at conferences, and we shared a life. And I told him what I had found. And Gerry, who said later, Judy was always so excited about any new thing. I didn't pay much attention. His memory isn't so good. He paid a lot of attention. He said, when can you get to California with it? And I said, not this week, but next weekend I can come. He said, don't forget to bring it with you. And I not only carried the course in 2 heavy shopping bags, because it did weigh almost 20 pounds. And then he picked me up at the airport and we went back and he started to read it aloud. And I have never seen anything like this in my life or since. I knew Gerry very well. He was not what we call a highly literate person. He was much more intuitive. In fact, as he said, he just squeaked through school and had to be tutored through medical school. So for him to read a book, which the text, we have to admit, is pretty intellectual, was very unusual. But he was so moved by the first few pages that he said, I want to talk to these people right away. And I called Helen and Bill. I was in California visiting Gerry. I called him back in New York City, and he talked to him on the phone about half an hour and immediately invited them to come to California. It was the beginning of the summer, and being professors, they had the summer off. So we arranged within 2 or 3 weeks, I would go back to New York and bring Helen and Bill and Ken and Helen's husband, Louis, to California with me. It was so fluid. I think now that was extraordinary. They had no idea who he was. They barely knew me. How in the world did all of this happen? And it's all been like that all the way through. So here we are, 45 years later. Gerry is 95 years old. And I see him every Thursday until COVID, and now we're on the phone every Thursday. He's totally blind and hard of hearing. He hardly sees anyone. He spends most of his day in contemplation, prayer, and he says, oh, don't forget sleep. Because at that age, you do sleep quite a lot. I asked him when he first told me he would like to have these weekly meetings, which was right after my husband died. I asked him why. You know, why do you want to commit yourself to us being together every Thursday? And he said, I started with you and I want to finish with you. And that touched me so much. I just felt like sharing that story with you now, because I don't know dedication more than that. I have never, ever seen such a transformative process in a person as I have seen in my beloved Gerry. So when you see the little clip that Ian is going to show, I'm not so sure that that story comes out. I'll say one more thing about him. In our Thursdays together, he likes to have nobody around. And Gerry is very definite about what he thinks and what he'd like, and he's not shy about saying it. And he said, we're going to have this time together, no one else. And his wife loved it because it freed her to see her sister. So she said it gave her breathing space. So that was wonderful. And someone entered the house one day, and she wanted to deliver something to me and saw Gerry there and decided to sit down at our luncheon table to talk to him, which she really didn't want. And remember, he is totally blind and a little bit deaf. And this woman said, Gerry, I haven't seen you alone. How have you been? And I could see his face. For an instant, he was a little bit annoyed, and then it went away. And he turned to her direction, and he said, still learning. And I think that's the message I wanted to give you when we start out on this journey together today. It doesn't matter how long you're studying the course. If you're really serious about it, if you really want to change your mind, if you really want to feel inner peace, it's attainable. I can't say for myself it's attainable full time, but I would hope that Gerry, even without his eyesight, can see in me the change I see in him, because this is our goal.
Would you like to rest your voice now? We'll move on. And then after the video, I'm concerned about it. No, don't go. I will play the little video, and then it says roughly 23 minutes. And then Judy will be back to answer any questions that you may have up until around about 8 o'clock our time. Okay, so I'm going to share screen again, and
So my purpose today is to tell you of my own personal experiences with the scribes, Helen and Bill. And I hope I can bring them even more alive for those of you who are interested. I do want to recount the ways in which these two professors of psychology became my teachers for the rest of their lives. Where to pick up the many memories that crowd my mind as I try to select a few choice stories that illustrate the depth of the level these two people knew and understood the course and how they taught it to me. One night, I had a deeply disturbing dream. It was sharp and memorable, and I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. During the next afternoon with Helen, I told her the dream, and this is what it was. I dreamt I was not a body, but a tiny speck of consciousness drifting in a vast sea of forever. There was nothing to see, no place to go, just awareness of being. And it was quite peaceful. All of a sudden, I felt a magnetic pull tugging at me, and I was chagrined to notice that in the far distance I could perceive something big, black, ugly, and threatening. I tried to change direction, but could not. I was on a straight track towards the object and helpless to break the pull. As I came closer, I realized it was, don't laugh now, a big ebony salad bowl. Well, of course, it doesn't sound frightening now, but this was in the middle of the night, and it was a dream. I was still trembling at the thought as I recounted this dream to Helen. Suddenly, I perceived myself suspended above it, and I didn't know what to do. I kept my figurative eyes as a speck of consciousness closed and was just shaking. Finally, I felt impelled to open my eyes and look down into that ugly, horrendous, ebony salad bowl, but it wasn't black at all. It was glistening, clear acrylic purple, with beautiful rays of light emanating from it. I stared in wonder, and the fear subsided. Obviously, I couldn't shake this dream nor explain it to myself. When I finished telling the story, quite out of breath, she smiled, and she took my hand, and she patted it as if I were a tiny child. "Oh, kitten," she exclaimed, "don't you see? The dark, bottomless, ebony black bowl was your guilt. You faced it, and you recognized it was nothing." A dream in the abstract, a gentle nudge from my teacher to interpret. Changing one's mind about threat, about fear. What a lesson in forgiveness that was. A shift in perception. Re-perceiving fear and watching it turn into love. It was a miracle, and miracles are natural signs of forgiveness. On a lighter note, Bill always kept us supplied with humor and antics to amaze us. Bill had developed a selective listening to resolve what seemed like insurmountable problems. Miracles are natural. When they do not occur, something has gone wrong. Bill lived by that. He expected it all the time. He knew that he had to be in the right state of mind, though, or nothing would happen. And of course, a miracle being a shift in perception, he had to let go of his fear about not getting that which he wanted. Miracles are natural. When they do not occur, something has gone wrong. And, even more so, miracles arise from a miraculous state of mind, or a state of miracle readiness. Bill demonstrated that so completely, it was a lesson so thoroughly learned by me and all of those who knew him, that it's almost like breathing now when this happens, and isn't that right, of course? Bill taught in other ways, too. He didn't raise his voice. He wasn't demanding. He didn't have high expectations of me. he returned my love equally and coolly. One day, I wasn't in New York City where I lived at the time. I was in California visiting a very good friend. And we got into this terrible argument, which really meant that I screamed at him and he cried. And I yelled at him and I cussed him out. I don't even remember what he did, but whatever it was, I thought it was terrible. And he finally hid inside his room and he locked the door, and I knew that I couldn't get at him to kill him, which of course is what I wanted to do. So I went to the telephone and I called Bill Thetford back in New York City, and I was crying on the phone, and I said, and he did this and he did that and then he did this and that, and now he's in his room and I can't even get in there to kill him. It was quiet. And Bill said, there are only 8 little words I have to say to you. Are you willing to see your brother sinless? No, I screamed. Well then, Judy, when you are, you'll feel just fine. And he hung up. You can imagine how stunned I was, and also angry. But I did it. Later, Bill reminded me of something we all know really well, and I'm sure have said many, many times. My sinless brother is my guide to peace. My sinful brother is my guide to pain, and which I choose to see, I will behold. Lesson learned for them. After I had heard their story, which had been kept secret for so long, with only a few people being cognizant of this amazing spiritual document, I asked Helen if she was aware of the source of the voice she claimed dictated the entire course to her. For me, this was an obvious question, because during my years of reading and research and teaching, I had come into contact with more than a few channels and mediums. They were old hat for me, and many of them had identified the sources of inspiration, such as Emmanuel and Seth, and Eileen Garrett, the famous medium, had her gatekeeper. I was thus very surprised to see Helen get quite pale again, and lower her eyes and look away from me. Bill laughed and grabbed her hand again and said, come on, Helen. If we're going to show her our document, she'll figure it out in no time. Reluctantly, Helen hissed out of the side of her mouth, he says he's Jesus. Well, is he? I urged. Her reluctance vanished, and she smiled so sweetly, looked at me and said, of course it is. That's when I found out that both Helen and Bill were very embarrassed to be telling this story to a stranger, and especially to reveal the source. I guess I was so much less new to this than they were, and probably so much more accepting, since I didn't find anything strange at all about this story. In fact, it felt as if it were the most natural thing in the world, to be sitting there with them and hearing something that sounded so wondrous and yet so reasonable. I did ask, of course, right away to see the material, and they unlocked the filing cabinet hidden in their office and brought out 7 large black thesis binders stuffed with pages. They were professors, and they supervised many people who were getting their PhDs, and so these were the kind of binders that were very common for them to use. Bill put the first one on my lap, and I opened it up to the introduction that you all know so well. I can't say I understood it, but I intuited that this was the help I had been seeking. In fact, the help I had unknowingly begged for just a few weeks earlier when I cried out, won't someone up there please help me? I asked to take the books home, and they agreed, as long as I would not show them to anyone. Of course, I concurred. One thing I wanted to know, though, and this was a puzzlement. Why me? Bill explained that when they were finished with the scribing and the recopying and the editing of the course, they felt it was not for them alone. Helen asked the voice whether this sense was true, and she was told, yes, someone will come to take it on its way. Still wondering and waiting a few months later, she asked again, and this time was told, the woman who was coming is not yet ready. And finally, when Bill felt he had intuitively identified that woman as me, Helen asked the voice again, why her? And she was told that I was finally ready for my spiritual education. When they told me this, I knew it was the only answer I could accept, because it was absolutely true. Helen affirmed this with a reminder that no one is sent by accident to anyone. And Bill chimed in with, no one is where he is by accident. And chance plays no part in God's plan. I believed this, and I had the feeling that I would probably read this in the document I was now taking home. And eventually I did. But that first day, with these three people, Helen, Bill, and Ken, my awareness began of something unfolding of which I was but a part and over which I had no control. Weeks later, when I mentioned to Bill how weird it was that I had blurted out to Helen at the table that day in the faculty dining room, "So you are hearing an inner voice," he laughed and said that's when he was sure I was the one. And then he quoted me a line from the Course, which affirmed the rightness of my outburst to Helen. "You have succeeded whenever you have reached another mind and joined with it." Just what I thought, I said. So that was my new beginning, my change in life, and everything from then on became for me either before the Course or after the Course. As naturally as water flowing, we began to meet daily and talk about the Course as I studied it. Remember, they'd had it for many years, and Ken was already there 2.5 years before me, so he had thoroughly studied it. He had also been responsible in getting Helen, who was kicking and screaming, to re-edit the material, to decide upon capitalization and paragraphing and chapter headings. And of course, the way he did that was they would ask together every single thing they knew had to be done. They would ask for the Holy Spirit to guide them and give them an answer. So by the time I got there, it was already in publishable shape. I nicknamed them, without telling them in the beginning, the Holy Three. And that was because this trio seemed that way to me. We had daily gatherings at my house, and I was able to keep focused as I studied a truly remarkable document because of their help. They did rush me along a bit. I had to spend a lot of time reading and digesting. But how lucky I was to be able to ask questions of the duo who scribed the material. No one could know it better than Helen and Bill. Their subjective attitudes about this term time working with me in my home differed. Helen was truculent in the beginning of a discussion. She would fuss, she would fidget, and think of all sorts of other more interesting things we could be doing at the moment. Bill was attentive, ready for course conversation, but he was punning all the while. Ken had the enormous task of keeping Helen going and serving her so well that he would know when she had enough. Then he would take her home to her dinner and her husband. There were many times we spent on a one-to-one basis. Helen would play the role with me of mother and teacher. She loved me to call her Mama, and she called me Kitten. We shopped and we gossiped. We went through my wardrobe. She threw out all the clothes she didn't like. She made me go to the shoe store and get shoes just like her, which were sensible flats, but ugly as can be. She was a study in opposites. Helen was nourishing and loving to me, yet sometimes very critical and extremely demanding. I soon learned this was a very complex, intelligent, and intense lady. And what a therapist she was. Many times I witnessed how she dealt with people who had problems. They could have been people she knew. They could have been patients I heard about. They could have been people who were coming to my house to visit with them. She always was so right on. She was intuitive, insightful, and clear. And quite remarkable indeed. But then there was this other side. And I felt both protective of her and defensive from her. Bill, on the other hand, would often eat dinner with us and just play. at words, at jokes, at relaxing. There were many differences of opinions and quite vocal between the two of them. It was clear to see that these two were not a matched pair. Yet despite past and current animosities, some recriminations, old painful history rehashed, and the opposite of forgiveness, the very great lesson I learned from spending years and years with Helen and Bill together was when it came time to explain the course, to meditate together asking for guidance for its future. Then they were of one mind. They would reach out for each other, hold hands, and pray. And what emerged was a peacefulness, a gentleness, a purposefulness about their relationship that was stunningly beautiful to see. I wondered how to express this change to myself and others. When I finally read this sentence in the course in the next to last chapter, the will of God forever lies in those whose hands are joined. The will of God forever lies in those whose hands are joined. I knew this was what I had witnessed so many times with my beloved teachers. Helen was a bit of a hypochondriac. She knew all the things that could go wrong with the body, and she feared them. She examined each new symptom, be it a cold or stomach ache, as if it could be something much worse. Bill composed a mantra. Its rhythm and substance will be quite familiar to you long-term students of the course. Whenever Helen would worry out loud about coming down with something, Bill would chant, "I am a body, I am sickly, get me to a doctor quickly," over and over again, and finally Helen would just have to laugh. Sometimes Bill would tease Helen, misquoting some of the lyrics that they both admired. The operettas of Gilbert and Sullivan was a favorite of them both. One day Helen was complaining about the voice, which as usual was giving her really good guidance that she didn't like. Bill stood up, he did a little soft shoe routine, and he announced that he had the new theme song for the popular Broadway show, Call Me Madam. He wanted to abbreviate the name of the show, though, from Call Me Madam to Call Me Mad. He was funny. Often when I read the line in the course, "And God's Son forgot to laugh," I'd remember Bill making light of even the angst around learning the course. And once again, remember to laugh at our illusion. At one point in our relationship, we decided that it might be a good idea for us all to live together. I mean, can you believe that? That would be Helen and her husband, Louis, by the way, he wanted no part of this, Bill, Ken, my husband, Bob Skutch, and myself. So, of course, being a little nester, I started searching for the perfect place. Helen said it had to have water near it, it should be on a hill, it should be this, it should be that. Well, you can imagine what a wild goose chase I went on, and of course I never found it. And then it turned out that no one really wanted to do that anyway. They were trying to make me feel good. I was complaining. What kind of a lesson is this anyway? I spend all this time looking at properties, I go running hither and yon, and no one even wants to do this. What a waste. Grouse, grouse, grouse. Bill was reading the paper and half listening to me, and then he waited until I finished complaining. "Dear," he intoned with a poker face, "don't you know that heaven is your real estate?" I threw a pillow at him. At one time, I was going through the end of a very nasty special relationship, and I mean nasty. Finally coming out of it on the peaceful side with much help from my therapist, Helen, I said to her, "Well, now I understand what that was all about." I had to learn how ugly specialness can get when one wants to try to control another person and make them be what you want them to be, when you want something from them and they don't give back. "Oh, why would you need to learn that, kitten?" Helen purred. "Well, so I could empathize with other people who also have this experience, and since I'm going around and presenting the course, I need to know a little bit about this special relationship stuff as if I didn't have others." I said this quite smugly. Out came the claws. "Nonsense," she retorted. "Don't be ridiculous. The Holy Spirit teaches that sacrifice in any form is unnecessary." Was I ever quiet? Bill was often consulted by friends who asked him, "How do I know if I'm making progress in this course?" He always had the same gentle answer. "It depends upon how long you now hold a grievance. And I still do that today. Years and years since he's died, and I still think about how is my relationship with so-and-so? Am I still holding on to any grievance? If I can answer really no, I say thank you, Bill. It's a great yardstick. Toward the end of Helen's life, she did become seriously ill, and she worried about money. How could she afford the doctors and the nurses and the medicines? To try to ease her mind, I volunteered, Helen, I know you are not destitute, but if you really feel you don't have enough, I'm going to go to the bank, withdraw all my assets, and sign them over to you. Oh, kitten, she murmured, that wouldn't be enough. Okay, then, I'll ask Bob and Bill and Ken to do the same. She thought about this for a second, and then the Helen clear voice came forth. Kitten, there is no amount of money in this whole wide world that would make me feel safe. This remark has stayed with me throughout the years and has served as a powerful reminder when I get trapped in some wrong-mindedness. With Helen, the powerful teaching was usually, do as I say, and not as I do. And for me, it worked. One day, when discussing the application of forgiveness, Bill came up with a catchy phrase that has served us so very well. He said, the concept of forgiveness is easy when you think of it as celestial amnesia, forgetting everything negative about someone and remembering only the positive, remembering only love. I love that. It's something I still think of today. Obviously, I could go on for days, but how do you summarize 30 years of learning? And what is the point of reminiscing anyway? If there is anything at all you take away from this time we spent together, it's the very ordinariness of the scribes of the Course. They were two ordinary people to whom something extraordinary happened because they joined in looking for a better way. Myths about them abound, and they are mostly just that, myths. The last thing in the world these two private folk would want is for their personas to be distorted and exalted. They would often claim, sometimes with disgust, we are not gurus of this course, we are only its first students. Our Bill was a pragmatic professor who claimed he had nothing to profess. Our Helen was a woman who had learned how to get out of the way and listen. Together, they both perfectly performed their function, and for that, we are eternally grateful. I know I am, and I have a feeling that you are too. God bless them, and love is the way we walk in gratitude.
Got a bit of time now for if anyone's got any questions for Judy. If you'd like to raise your hand in the participants box, you can do that. It's a little blue hand that comes up. You click on the three dots in the bottom right hand corner to raise your hand, and then I should be able to see that.
Ian, I have a question here in chat.
Okay, good.
For Judy.
Yes.
If it's not too personal, how did you deal with the death of your husband? And did A Course in Miracles help? It's so brilliant to see you this evening. Much love and gratitude from Angela.
Thank you so much. If I don't start to cry, and from joy, not from sadness, then I think I might tell you a bit. My husband left his body very quickly. He was a little bit over 91 years old. We were living extremely happily and both still working full time, as I am still now. And my husband, Whit, was in charge of the whole translation program of A Course in Miracles. And he worked in partnership with Ken Wapnick, Dr. Wapnick, who trained the translators. And Whit managed the whole program. So they were in contact almost every day. I was used to being with this man 24/7 for more than 40 years. We came together because of the course. I am so glad we did not meet when we were very young, but rather we met as students of the course because that's what our marriage was about. And very often we used to say, as our love grew and grew and grew, more even on the spiritual domain than on the everyday, ordinary physical domain, that we would like to merge into each other. We would like to be one, but we couldn't decide which one. So we laughed a lot about that. But just to say that we were very close. He's my third husband. So I said third time was my charm. And I was very grateful that I had the opportunity to have been married to two other really fine human beings who were still very much in my life. In fact, my second husband, Bob Skutch, helped me found the Foundation for Inner Peace, and still today, at the age of 95, still is the financial vice president. He and my husband, who he had never met before, my third husband, Whit, became best friends. That was the course in action, truly, in our lives. We never thought for an instant that it was strange. My ex-husband, Bob Skutch, married again to a woman to whom we were very close, just the way we were close to Gerry and Diane Cirincione, his wife. All of those temporal relationships seemed to vanish, and we were together more as spirit than as ordinary everyday friends, which we were too. So when my husband said to me that he was really sorry that he wouldn't be at our granddaughter's violin solo concert in San Francisco, and she is quite a well-known solo violinist, I said to him, because thinking that he'd just be too tired, "It's okay, honey, but I'll make sure someone's with you. But do you mind if I go?" And since it was only a half an hour drive from where we live, I knew he wouldn't mind. But he said, "Of course not. You have to go." And I said, "Well, maybe if you feel better, you'll go." He said, "I won't be there, honey. I'm sorry." I was that stupid that I didn't realize no one dies without his own consent. And sometimes it's known and sometimes it's not. In other words, sometimes it's brought to our consciousness in the present, and sometimes it lives where it usually dwells, in our higher awareness. My feeling is that my husband died very consciously. In fact, the morning that he died, we were supposed to have lunch with two people who were involved with the Chinese translation from China. And they had come to see us along with our Chinese translator. And in the morning, I noticed he wasn't moving very quickly. He had breakfast himself. He typed letters on the computer. About half an hour later, my husband was dying. There was no question in my mind that this was exactly the way it should be. I didn't even think about what it would be like without his physical body, because he was more to me than his physical body. And he had promised me he would never, ever leave me alone. And I believed him. And I believed the promise in which he made it. So I was there with his body, and I kept thanking it and kissing it and caressing it and thanking it for being the shell that he used while he was here, all the while saying to him, "You know you're not a body, you're free, you're still as God created you." And then a few other of his favorite lines from the course for about 2 hours. It was just so beautiful. The doctor had come, and he stood outside the room, which was not lit from the inside. I didn't have lamps on or anything. And he said to me, "What's happened here?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Why is that room full of light?" And I didn't see it. And I said, "There's no special light." He said, "Judy, this room is so bright with light, I can hardly keep my eyes open." And then I knew that something quite remarkable had happened. My husband was saying goodbye, but at the same time, the love that we had for each other was so far beyond death and the body. We both knew there is no death. We both knew that the Son of God is indeed free. Living with it was something else. And my son came to visit. My daughter lives in California with me and is now co-president of our foundation. So she's always around. But my other child, my son, came from Princeton, New Jersey, to be with me for a few days. And he's a techie genius. He's a neuroscientist, and he maps the brain. So he's very familiar and has been almost since his first computer 20-something years ago. And he had the foresight or the insight to realize that I felt that Whit was completely with me, but that the grieving process is different for everyone. And he immediately sat down at the computer and he made a shell of a website. He said, "Here, you can make a website for Whit." It took me a year to finish this very involved website. It has his voice. It has video clips of him. I kept thinking I was doing it for his 5 children. It had all sorts of things. He had written a 1,000-page autobiography. It had sections of that on it. It had his whole career. He had been in the military for 23 years and then served in government for 10. It had everything, and I had about 280 photographs. It took me a year, every day working about 2 hours at night from 12 to 2 in the morning. That was my grieving. And it was the opposite of grief. I was so much with him, and I felt his presence so completely that when the year was finished and I finally mounted it for his children, close family and friends to see, it turned out I was the only one really interested. So thinking I was doing it for everyone else, I finally realized that I was really doing it for me. There hasn't been a day that goes by that I haven't had some kind of what we might call paranormal experience where I have a sense of his presence. In the beginning, for the first 2 months, it was always in front of witnesses because he knew that the scientific part of me always liked proof. And so there was always a witness present when suddenly, of its own accord, music would start playing, which were 3 love songs in a row. And when you actually took the words and put them together, it was a love letter from Whit. People would start coming over and saying, "Is he going to write to me? Is he going to sing to me?" And after a while, that stopped. But my husband's favorite number, for many reasons, was 23. First of all, his name was William Wallace Whitson. Those are 3 W's like World Wide Web. And that's the 23rd letter in the English language. Plus, he had a lot of other connections to 23. There's not a day that goes by that I don't turn on my email and check my mail that I don't see it sometime during the day, a 23 up there, which is kind of against the statistics of odds. I always take a picture of it. So I have my own file with hundreds of pictures of my computer registering 23 at the top.
Judy, I hate to break in, but that's really lovely and very, very touching to hear that. Do you have to go soon? Because there's at least one person with a question. Have you got time to take that?
Glad to answer it, and I don't worry about time once I start.
I noticed. Okay, Rona, if you unmute yourself, then Judy will take your question. There you go.
Thanks so much, Ian. Yeah, thanks so much, Judy. Yeah, amazing your presence, and I love all the stories, and I want to hear everything. Thanks so much. Yeah, I wanted to say, what do you, when people ask you for the best way into studying the text? I've studied the text in different ways myself. I'm interested. What do you say is the best way in for people? Do you say, to find their own way, or do you say, go to a group regularly, or study at home, or read it back to back, or which way do you say?
It's an excellent question, Rona. I do believe the text is integrally important to the course. I know quite a few people said, "Oh, I've been through the course, I did the workbook." Well, that can't hurt. But of course, it's not really understanding this document. You must understand the metaphysics of it, or it's really hard to live your life understanding how we can find inner peace in the times of disaster and turmoil. So the way that I did it is not the way other people do it. Everyone must ask one's higher teacher. That's what he's there for, or it's there for. How do I do this? In fact, every day I ask, because I do indeed still study the text every day. Now I do it alone, but also I do it in concert with the two co-presidents of our foundation, my daughter and a gentleman named Dr. Robert Rosenthal, who I've known since he's 19, and his wife. And we call our study group SLG, for Slow Learners Group. Now, after 45 years, we still consider ourselves slow learners. We read one section a day. I don't mean the whole chapter. I mean one section. And then we discuss it. And then we have a meditation about it and see what comes up. Now, if you're alone, reading one section and trying to read it carefully, even reading some of the sentence over a couple of times to make sure you really get what it means, and then just closing your eyes and asking yourself, your higher self, to help you understand, process, and remember this is the best way I know how. Some people just step into it. They'll open the book and read what comes up. That's fine, but I think that's fine after you've been through the whole thing. You're never going to learn it the first time you go through it. Mm-hmm. You will learn enough to make you want to keep on going. Mm-hmm. Does that help at all?
Yeah, of course. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I've got my question. May I ask it?
Why not?
Okay. Forgot what it was. Oh yeah, in the videos, it's very clear about the editing process that Helen went through with Ken. I mean, very meticulous, as Ken would be, and Helen was resistant, but Ken kept her on track. And she would always ask for every change that was made, right? And then, so how do you with that in mind? How do you feel today when there's different versions of the course? You know, so-called complete editions and sparkly covered editions. And all of which were earlier pre-edit.
I am so glad that you brought that up. First of all, there aren't different editions of the course. There are different drafts of the course. What was printed as different editions was actually taken illegally from various parts, including the Library of Congress. They changed their laws after that, that's for sure. Because when Helen first started taking down the course, she didn't have the slightest idea what it was. And she would stop every once in a while and ask about her dead Aunt Sophie. Or she would get involved in the course, a conversation about Freud. And of course, she was very angry that Bill was homosexual. So she would ask questions about that. And that got into the early part of the course. Of course, after the first 100 pages, and if you actually look and count, you'll see it's about that. Nothing like that exists anymore because she got into the total flow of listening to the voice without her ego interrupting. So when it was finished, it was very clear that she had made all of these inclusions that Jesus didn't want. How was it made clear? Because he told her. He said she had to go back. She just didn't want to go and do that. And Bill tried to get her to go back and correct it, and she wouldn't. I don't mean correct it. I mean listen to what Jesus was telling her. So finally, Ken came along, and of course, he was brought into this game just the way we all are. And he could convince Helen to sit every day and ask for about an hour the most Jesus what the changes were. And she started from the beginning. And after about a page 100, there weren't any more. So that was what they gave me in a typed manuscript, what they had worked on. There were, by the way, in the beginning, it was run on. There were no numbers. There were no paragraphs. It just was a run-on document. So Jesus had to tell Helen where every new chapter began and where the new sections began. It was quite a job. Ken was indisputably the person who gave it to us in the form that Jesus wanted it today. I know there's a lot of gossip, misunderstanding, as there always is in every tradition, that Ken took over. You had to know Ken there. First of all, he had a terrible stammer and didn't like to open his mouth. Second of all, he was so shy. He didn't speak, possibly because of the stammer. There was no question Helen was in charge. Helen was big boss. And there wasn't a thing that could be done to her book without Jesus telling her to, and then Ken helping implement it. So I always call the other versions or editions exactly what they are, drafts. My husband's a writer. He published about 9 books. Very often, he would give me, particularly in his novels, the material to look at, and I take my heavy duty red pen and make big marks and then cut things out and edit it the way I felt he might like it to be, and then he either accepted them or not. If someone had gotten into his computer and stolen his first 3 or 4 versions, drafts of his document and printed them themselves, I wonder how he would have felt.
Right.
So that's all I have to say. Look, if people come to those books because the people who represent them are very strong in making them available to people, God bless them, because we know from page 100 on, it's the course. The course is 500,000 words. And if they have taken the earlier ones when there's discussions about things that the course doesn't discuss anymore. I mean, the word soul, for instance, was used in the beginning. Helen didn't comprehend it. She knew soul. We all knew what soul meant. But by the time she herself started to understand it, it didn't appear again. So people who make comparisons of the different drafts, they learn a lot too, don't they? And anyone who studies the course as it is, the workbook's exactly the same. And almost all of the text is the same. It only gives more people the availability to see it.
Judy, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I think your doctor's late.
I don't hear the doorbell, but I better get off. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to continue. We've got lots of good things coming up, but I want to thank you so much for your time today, and I particularly just want to thank you for doing your life's work, which has been so beneficial to
with me and augmenting it. Without all of you and Ian's work particularly, who knows how many people wouldn't know about A Course in Miracles.
Thank you.
So thank all of you.
If you all want to unmute yourself, you could thank Judy yourself. Everybody.
Thank you, Judy. That was so wonderful, Judy.
Brilliant.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Judy.
Wow.
Ah.
Right. What happens now? Judy's gone by the looks of things. Right. Okay. So, as I said, we've got plenty more good things to come. I've got some more Judy answering some more questions on video. So if I can manipulate the video, okay, I'm going to ask the questions, and she's going to answer on the video. If you follow me, there's a couple of other little bits, particularly one on healing relationships, begins in relationships, which is lovely. Then there's the bit with Gerry Jampolsky, which is also very touching. And, Judy was saying on the earlier video about this friend that she was fighting with, and she was shouting at him, and he ran off and hid himself in this room. It's made clear in another bit that we won't see that was Gerry. So that's really interesting. I didn't know that. And then around 8:45, we've got the recording of Helen's voice, which probably maybe none of you have heard before. It's really lovely. And I found that very moving. It's all very moving, actually. And then we can have some sharing at the end. Okay. Right. So let me just set up the video, and then, okay.
Lovely, I was there.
Right. Right. So the first question that somebody put to Judy is, I have the impression that Helen Schucman said, "A Course in Miracles is true," but she didn't believe it. I found that very strange. Is that true?
Absolutely, I was there. Thank you for asking the question. I can tell you, absolutely, I was there. Actually, Rose Hoffman, who was a professor at Stanford University, was visiting us in New York because he wanted to meet Helen. And they talked for hours about statistics, which was a subject that she was pretty well informed about, and he was too. And so they found commonality. And all of a sudden, Willis looked at his watch. He said, I've got to go to the plane, and I haven't even talked to you about what I came for. And she said, well, don't bother about that. He said, no, before I leave, Helen, would you tell me really, what do you think about the Course? And she thought for a second, and then she looked directly at him, and she said, you know, Willis, I know it's true. I just don't believe it. And when he left, I had the courage to say to her, Helen, what you said to Willis was quite accurate. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, there's only one letter that has to be changed. You said, you know it's true. You just don't believe it. The D and the don't must be a W. So you know it's true and you just won't believe it. I was commenting upon volition, willingness, and Helen did not have the volition or the willingness to practice the Course. It was her choice. And I also think it was perfect that way. Because did she know it? Oh, very well. Did she choose to use it? No, she did not want to give up her prejudices, her angers, and her fears. She did not want to. That was her choice. And don't we all know so many people like that? Even people studying the Course, they don't really want to give up the past. They don't want to really let go. They don't really want to give up anything in order to accept God's plan of atonement. And that's okay. There'll be other ways and other times for them. They'll find something that's right for them. But Helen chose not to, and it was her right.
The next question is, I'm a long-term student of the Course. I get concerned that it can evoke a head-in-the-sand mentality to problems of the world, to violence, the environment, etc. Is this something Bill, Helen, and Ken ever engaged with? I remember reading that Ken felt that kindness towards the world was required, including to all life.
Well, kindness, as you know from many teachers and avatars, and some even living today, is a very important part of the spiritual path. So as we see ourselves living in this dream, this world of illusion, that seems very real to us indeed, practicing kindness is necessary. And it would be practicing kindness even not only to the people. How do you practice kindness to an environmental concern such as the burning of Amazon forests? That's a very big one. The only way I could answer this for myself is I recognize it. I recognize what the problem is. It's really a problem of separation. And I go within and I ask, how should I think about this? If I don't do this 100 times a day, I'm not really living the life that I want to choose. People will get different answers depending upon what their lessons are, because the internal teacher, the Holy Spirit, knows better than we do. So that some people will have to take an active part in demonstrations. Some people will have to take an active part in fundraising to try to help the situation by allowing other people who know how to visit the area and perhaps do things like planting trees again or influencing the governments of that country. There are people all over who get guidance to do things that we wouldn't do ourselves because we don't need to. What we need to do is turn over the whole situation, the horror of the dream, to the Holy Spirit and say, how should I think about this? What shall I do? I know many people talk about the Course. It was an ostrich in the sand, hiding its head, because there is very definite a section that I need to do nothing. Well, if people would read on and really try to remember what it says, it also tells us we need to do nothing except go to the still, more quiet center within, from which we will be sent forth on all the busy doings of the world.
Bill was able to get very specific help in the world, such as getting opera tickets, which is the sort of thing he did a lot, apparently. Do you think this can be a trap to look for something specific in the world?
I feel so absolutely not. But remember, we all have differences of opinion, even students of the course. No, I found it with Bill, and since he was a great teacher of mine with myself, that there is no trap except the traps we make with our own mind. If our minds and hearts are open, and again, we ask for the guidance in everything, then we are going to get exactly what we need at that time, at that moment, that will help us along our way. We didn't undertake this path lightly. Remember, we have a partner. We're not going alone. The partner within is the true guide and the true teacher of the course.
Do you feel that you understand the course completely now? Do you have any outstanding things you still need to master? Does the course lead to enlightenment?
After 44 years, I can tell you that I am not a person who can actually chant chapter and verse. But I think that my way is I've been guided to understand the course after reading it many, never not reading it or doing the lessons, is by applying it. It's the application of the course that really it's all about. Studying the text and learning it very well is an excellent idea because it gives a background for the lessons and the context in which you're going to be embarking upon a change of mind, so monumental that I call it the Olympics of the mind. When you are completely and absolutely dedicated to living this way, you are given the opportunity to know how to practice it and also how to live it. And I find that in 44 years, I don't know that I can do more than I have and that I'm trying to do. My particular path right now at my age is to see everyone through the eyes of Christ, to absolutely accomplish forgiveness in every sickness, in every thought of ill health, in every situation where I am not seeing with the eyes that are my eyes of vision rather than my body eyes. So do I feel that this is a way to enlightenment? I don't really know what enlightenment is. All I want to do is live in a happy dream. And the Course promises us, if we remove the barriers to letting go of fear, if we remove those barriers, and they give us very specific steps, then God himself will take the final step. How long can you live in a happy dream? I don't have the slightest idea, but I have seen signs of it. Bill Thetford, as I have said many times, at his death, for weeks before he died, was such a different person that he was shining. You could actually see rays coming from him if you closed your eyes. You absolutely knew that this man had accomplished what he set out to do. He asked for a better way, and he found it. Not only did he find the better way, he practiced it, he used it, and he accomplished it. So if that's called enlightenment, that's good enough for me. I call it the happy dream.
Can you tell us if you, Ken, Helen, and Bill had a mystical experience of oneness?
Helen definitely had more metaphysical experiences than I could count. And Bill told me he took down about 80 of them. He was writing it up, as she told him, for a few years before the course even came. When the course started to come and announce itself by, "This is a Course in Miracles, please take notes," then, of course, it was all attention was spent for her to listen and take them down in shorthand, bring them to Bill the next morning, and he would type them up and they would read it and marvel at what it was saying, would be resistant in Helen's case. But she did have many metaphysical experiences where she felt that she was also in tune with something much greater than herself, where her body disappeared and she felt only the love of God. Bill certainly had experiences. Again, I think if you were to read a book about Bill, Carol Howe actually wrote one that's quite excellent. Don't forget to laugh, never forget to laugh. Then I think you would find some of those experiences in there. And as for myself, well, I wouldn't be here talking with you if my life didn't start at a very young age with spontaneous mystical experiences that let me know that this was not my home. Now, what does that mean? Well, in E.T., we know what it means. Everybody cries when E.T. wants to go home. We all want to go home. I fell out a window when I was 3 years old, right in front of my parents' eyes. And as they ran to grab me, and I was actually what I felt like suspended as I was falling in slow motion. I, at 3 years old, was crying, "I want to go home. I want to go home." And they took me to the doctor and they ascertained there was nothing really the matter with me. And the doctor said to me, "Stop crying. Why are you crying?" And I said, "I want to go home." And when they drove me home and stopped in front of our house, they said very soothingly, "There, dear, you're home." And I remember screaming, "This is not my own. I want to go home." What I meant was, I want to go where I'm safe and don't fall out windows. So there was another home, even at 3 years old, that I intuited or remembered. And I think everyone's making this so all. But all through my life, I've had spontaneous experiences, except one when my teeth were pulled. That was a pretty powerful one, too, and we could go on forever because they still fascinate me. But I see them as learning tools that I was given so that I could keep on going. And I would know you are absolutely right in your experience of something more than this world. And that was indeed what led me to the Course itself.
Where do you see Foundation for Inner Peace in 10 years from now? Does the Foundation intend to work more closely with other Course in Miracles organizations?
Reminds me of a man of a large organization once came to visit us. And he also publishes a book that is quite well known in the spiritual realm. And he said, "I see a Course in Miracles wherever I look, and we've been around much longer than you." And I said, "And?" He said, "Well, we want to learn how to publicize our document." And I said, "Well, what can we tell you?" He said, "Can you tell me your publication plan?" And I said, "When the books are needed, we publish them." "Well, can you tell me the distribution plan?" I said, "We have no plan. People who need it go to bookstores or they write us." He said, "What about a business plan? Can you give me a business plan? My board of directors would love to have a business plan if you'd be generous enough just to share it with us." And I said, "Sure." He said, "Oh, great. Will you go and get it?" I said, "I can't get it. We don't have it." What do you do when you run an organization and not have a business plan? And I said, when we were first given this material in trust, I asked the same question as you did. I wanted a 5-year plan for the Foundation for Inner Peace. And the voice through Helen said kindly, "You do not need a 5-year plan. Don't you know that I will be with you every second along the way?" I will tell you what to do when it's needed, and you will follow it, and you will be glad to have it. I will tell you what you need at any given time, and I will provide everything that you need. How in the world can I say when our baby going to be? It's going to be 10 years from now. I didn't even think it'd be here today. Oh, we have no idea, and it's just not given us to think that way. And we're very comfortable just asking the Holy Spirit for everything, even in a daily meeting, whether it's an altercation between two people who are working together who at that moment are having friction, or whether it's funding, or whether it's do we publish large size type, or do we just name the idea. We don't know. We ask. And when we get a sense that something else is needed or desired of us, then we ask what that is and we're told how. A case in point is today's webinar. A few months ago, we didn't even think of having webinar. And then it came in some very interesting context, 3 or 4 times through different people, that this is the time to do this. And then we all asked together, and we absolutely heard yes. I had a feeling that the answer was thought you'd never ask. I'm not saying it was. That's the way we operate. We can't operate any other way because we do not know what anything is for. And the rules of the world in time and how one acts and how one performs and how one runs an organization, one's own life. It's all the same thing. It comes back to asking. That's what the Course teaches. That's what we follow.
The last question I was going to ask was one about when Helen was dying. But actually, I think I have an anecdote which is even better than Judy's answer. It's a story that came from Judy herself. And that is so Helen was on her deathbed, basically. This is very poignant. And Judy was kind of nursing her and holding her hand as she was sort of going in and out of consciousness. And one moment, this went on for several days, I get the impression. At one point, Helen had just kind of opened her eyes and said, Judy, do you know, why do you think I'm dying? Or do you know why I'm dying? And Judy said, no, Helen, I don't. I have no idea. And Helen said, to get out of its way. She felt she was an obstacle to the Course going out into the world. And she felt she had to literally get out of its way to let it run its course. So I find that's an amazing thing. Okay, one more thing before we get to Gerry and Judy, or Judy and Gerry. Okay, I'm going to share the screen again. It's just a little bit on the healing of the relationships between, I forget who it is now, Ken and Bill, I think, and also Whit and Bill, or Bill, Whit and Ken. I'm not sure which now. So share screen.
It was very clear to me that as we started to publish the Course itself, we were going to have some challenges. And what were the challenges? Our relationships. But 4 people together in a room who are passionate about what they do, and everyone has a different opinion. And the only way we could resolve these differences, of course, was to stop. First of all, remember, to stop and to ask. And we asked together. Bill Thetford was a very mild-mannered man. Helen was very dynamic. Bill saw the world through joy. A lot of puns were his way of reacting to a conversation. He always saw the funny side. He wasn't necessarily very peaceful, but he did use humor a lot. And the humor very often would smooth over the bad places. One day in this particular situation, he wasn't feeling very humorous. A book had been published that he felt very critical of. He was not seeing it kindly, and he was feeling that his judgment was the correct judgment, that certain things probably shouldn't have been written. And I can say in transparency that he was feeling very angry at Ken Wapnick. Ken Wapnick was a dearly devoted, not only student of the course, but teacher of the course, and at this point was just starting to write books. And Bill took umbrance with one of the books that had come out. And he was actually convinced that he wanted to say something about it. And since he was non-confrontational, he needed friends to help him. And so a few of our friends got together and they decided to be Bill's support system so that Bill could directly confront his brother, Ken. Well, Ken did not live in California at that time. Bill did. So Ken was coming west to see us all. And one of the things that Bill needed to tell him was that he disliked what he had published. And Bill came over to where I lived with my husband earlier than the meeting was called, and he was just pacing back and forth and revving up to be confrontational. And I found it pretty uncomfortable, so I did what Ken almost did all the time with us. I said, Bill, why don't you sit down next to me and hold my hand, and let's ask the Holy Spirit for guidance on this, because we're not feeling peace. And he said, okay. And he sat down, and two of us sat in quiet about 15 minutes until the doorbell rang. We got up, and in came Ken and the people who were going to be supporting Bill in this. And Bill got up, and he walked to Ken, and he said, welcome, Ken. I'm so glad to see you. It was over. There was no anger left in Bill. There was no judgment about the book. It wasn't important. He saw his brother, and he was glad. Now, I should add that the people who came to support him to be confrontational didn't know that we had sat 15 minutes in advance and asked for the Holy Spirit's guidance. So they were pretty concerned and were trying to rev Bill up again for him to say something. But he turned to them and he said, we are all perfection. And he meant it. Those are the miracles that we like to talk about when we talk about Course in Miracles. The shift in perception from fear to love. A Course in Miracles is about relationships. This is exactly why it exists, for us to get over the constant judgment of each other and see each other through God's eyes, through God's vision, through the Holy Spirit's guidance. See each other as one in love. And in this particular situation, it really worked. There are many. And from my mind, I'm going to have to pick another one. It's somewhat the same, but it's our process. And that's really what I can attest to. At this particular time, we had just started with a program of translations. Now, Helen had said A Course in Miracles can never be translated. In her lifetime, it wasn't. She was insistent that it couldn't be. It's funny, we didn't feel the need to ask at the time, and maybe if we'd asked, we would have gotten a different answer, and so would she. She was nearing the end of her life, and we just didn't get involved and weren't ready to be involved in such an enormous task. Eventually, we were. And we had to form a committee, and it seemed very, very necessary that the two people who knew the most in how to do this project participated as partners, and the partnership was Ken Wapnick, who would be and was the teacher of all the translators to make sure that they actually knew and understood the course so they could translate it, and my husband, Whit, who had been a manager of information for many years and who would manage the project. And they worked pretty well together. They weren't that close in the beginning, but they certainly became closer until one day when it all broke apart. Ken had felt the translation should be handled one way, and Whit had felt the translation be held
and worked in the opposite direction. And as much as they talked, and certainly they were both good talkers, as much as they talked this over, they couldn't come to any agreement, and it was getting more and more strained. At this point, we were living in California. Ken was living in New York, and it was even harder communicating on the telephone. And one day, it felt really important for Whit and for me to go to New York to see what could be worked out with Ken, because we were on the verge of a break. And to me, that would have been disaster. It doesn't matter what the issue was, but believe me, each person felt he was right. The night before Ken was to visit us in our hotel, Whit was pacing the room the same way Bill did. And he said that he didn't think that this was going to work out because he knew that Ken wasn't going to listen to him. And he gave me all the reasons why it wouldn't work. And frankly, I was getting frightened. And finally, we went to sleep, and Whit still was talking. And it occurred to me that what we did with each other always was to help each other through really dark spots. And this was a dark one. And I said, you know, honey, you've helped me do this in the past so many times. So right now, would you let me help you? Give it to the Holy Spirit. Just give it to just do that. And he said, I don't know if I can. I said, well, if you're the slightest willingness, show the slightest willingness, and you can. And so he said, all right. And we closed our eyes, and he just gave it up as best he could and went to sleep. In the morning, we got up, and Whit had changed. He was peaceful. He was friendly. He was funny. He was fine. So what happened? He said, I don't know. I think it left in my sleep. I said, what did you ask the Holy Spirit? He said, I just said, take this horror from me. I do not know what to do with it. Ken came at 9 o'clock in the morning and rang the bell. I opened up the door. I could tell by his stature and his pallor that he was nervous. And he was sad. Whit went to the door. He threw his arms around Ken, and he said, welcome, brother. It was over. It was totally, completely, and forever over. If I get a little emotional, I think, please forgive me. I could be in that moment now and feel the miracle happen. And when it does, we're always made glad.
But this evening, since we've never done it before, never done anything like this before, I felt we were just going to have to wing it a little bit. And I'm winging it now because I'm thinking we have overrun a bit, and maybe we've been watching quite a lot of videos. So maybe the best thing to do is to skip the Judy and Gerry one, maybe play that another time on another occasion, and jump now to Helen, the voice of Helen. Yes, I'm getting thumbs up from Angela. Thank you. Okay, so this was the story behind this recording of Helen. As I said, I think it's the only one that exists in the world, and it wasn't a formal interview or anything like that. They were at a very informal cocktail party, I guess, in New York. And you can hear in the background, there's the murmur of voices, there's the chinking of glasses, that kind of thing. And the guy who I think was some kind of journalist or something, he just sat down and started to ask Judy some questions, and either he or someone had a recorder. So it's a very rough and ready recording, but I think it's quite unique. And it was Judy who played it to me to start with on one of my 2 visits to her, I don't know, 15 years ago probably. And she gave me the recording on a CD. She made lunch. She's a great cook, by the way, even though she says she doesn't cook anymore. So I sat in a neighboring room, like a study, I guess, and the CD was played while Judy was making lunch. And I found it a very moving experience because I'd never, as I say, never heard Judy's voice, Helen's voice before. We think, if you've seen that Story of A Course in Miracles video, you hear a voice that's, but it's the voice of an actress, Welsh actress Glynis Johns. You may think that it's Helen, but it's not Helen, it's Glynis Johns. But this is Helen.
Regarding the voice you heard in describing A Course in Miracles, did it come from outside or from within?
There's nothing that I would call ordinary audition about this at all. It doesn't really... It's a curious thing, and it will be very difficult to explain. Somebody asked me, was it as though your hand was moving? No, I wrote perfectly voluntarily. In response to, I call it a voice, but a voice has sounds, or sounds as though it had something to do with hearing. I didn't hear anything. I think it's a sort of hearing that you can't really describe. It doesn't have anything to do with ears or waves hitting a drum or anything on that order. I don't really know. I think maybe I'm using the wrong word when I say hear. I sort of recognized it. It was very rapid. I could even, if I didn't catch a phrase, I could sort of say, would you mind doing that again, you know?
This was in your mind?
This is strictly mental. Otherwise, I would consider it hallucinatory activity. I don't feel it was that.
Is it comparable to anything in terms of how we hear ourselves talk, or like you talk to yourself?
It wasn't my voice. It couldn't have been because it talked about a whole area with which I am entirely unfamiliar.
What about subvocalizing? When you're subvocalizing, you're hearing the words. You're actually hearing them.
No, there's no vocalization. It's a process that I really would find impossible to explain. It's never happened to me before. I don't have any knowledge of the area so that I wouldn't be able to say like X or whatever it is, because I wouldn't know what X did.
You could hear the words clearly in your mind even though you didn't hear a sound?
I knew that that was the word. I think knew may be a better word than heard. I did not know consciously at the beginning of the sentence how it was going to end, and that puts me under a further handicap in terms of ordinary language, because ordinarily, I think if you're going to say a sentence, you know what it's going to be. You sort of get the gestalt immediately. But I didn't. And it came very easily, very rapidly, very smoothly. I guess even painlessly, except that it annoyed me to death, but that's irrelevant. I guess here isn't the right word. I could stop any time or pick it up any time. And I did in cabs and subways and anything, or sort of between telephone calls. But you're raising a question I don't think, Dave, I can answer.
Yeah.
I really am trying.
So a certain mechanism went on there, because you heard something translated into the shorthand style.
Yes, but I'm used to shorthand. I use it for group therapy sessions, so that shorthand is quite familiar to me.
So you don't even
it was really a matter of speed.
So you really
I couldn't have kept up with it in ordinary writing.
Oh, you couldn't?
Oh, no, it's very rapid. I needed the shorthand.
What about automatic writing? A thing when pen takes over and writes for the person. Person doesn't have any control. Is that similar to what you're describing?
No, that didn't happen at all. I could have stopped at any time, and I frequently did. And I was very frequently interrupted, so that I would have to stop. I didn't lose awareness of where I was or what I was doing. My interns kept barging in for therapy sessions. Now, Bill always says, well, I'm just naturally dissociated, which I never take as a compliment. But maybe it's that. And I think in a sense it must be, because I haven't caught up with it yet. And I don't understand it, and I still feel very baffled by it. And I'm also still just a little uncomfortable with the material, but I'm getting used to it now. And I'm also getting used to a feeling that it was the right thing to have done. The only curious thing that I do know, and this is curious, I am used to doing pretty much what I want to, and I do make my own decisions. But for some reason or other, it never occurred to me not to do this. I thought that this should be done. I made every effort to keep it without me. I did not want to intrude on it, and I felt that it was a matter of personal integrity not to. I really did not interfere with it. I think the thing that I found upsetting about it was it went against everything I believed, which is very hard to do. But I felt it was much more important. I know what I believe, but I didn't know what this was going to do next. And I was very pleased with its coherence and with its being very consistent, which is something that I would regard as a mandatory criterion. It read very well.
Yeah.
And I know the pain with which I managed to get something to read halfway as well as that, which is very agonizing. And this came out very quickly, talked about a system I don't know anything about, and confused me no end. I'm still cross-eyed. That's all I can really say about it.
Tried to edit it at times, didn't you?
Yes, I did. It would bother me, and I would never forget what it was originally, and I would feel kind of uneasy about it. But since I do so much editing, I figured, well, I'm improving this, and that's it. But then later, when it would pick it up again and refer back to that, then it would be inconsistent because it would use the original word. So then I very quickly learned, don't do that because you will interfere with the internal consistency. So then I stopped doing that. And very quickly I learned that that was a very bad mistake. So we went back and we changed all the words back into its original form.
Did you remember the word, or did you have to go back and just ask at the time?
And I used to tell Bill that used to be, whatever it was. But sometimes, I wouldn't say more than 2 or 3 times, I didn't know. But I was aware that there was a goof-off in through there, and I would feel the goof-off more than the right answer. And then I would sort of look at a blackboard in my head and see it written, the word it should have been. And I would ask, can I see it on the blackboard?
You would ask and also see it?
Yes, if I was undecided. I'd forgotten to mention that.
Would there also be that knowingness that accompanies it?
No, then I would be reading it. If it was on the blackboard, I would see it in letters.
Then it was a very visual thing in your mind.
And then it was visual. Ordinarily, it isn't. But I think that modality had to come in where I had kind of lost my way in it, and I really didn't know what the word should be.
Could you close this off at any time you didn't want to hear or do it?
Oh, yes.
In other words, it was strictly your option.
Oh, very much. Except that it kind of nudges me if I didn't do it. When I was sort of supposed to, sometimes I couldn't sleep. And then I would become very restless, and at one point I didn't do it for about 3 weeks. I felt quite pushed around by this, and enough is enough. And it was kind of a rough 3 weeks. But I didn't know when it was finished, and I didn't know when I was supposed to stop. The course came first. Well, the text is what we originally had called the course. The text is the right word for it.
Uh-huh.
That came first, and when that was through, I think there was something like a 3-month hiatus.
You had no urge to write them?
A while before I started in again, I said to Bill and also to Jonathan, I have a horrible feeling there's a workbook that goes with this, but maybe it's just maybe I'm going to be let off on this one. But I did know it, and it became increasingly clear that was it. And I knew at that time there would also be a teacher's manual, because that's obviously what professors have to teach with.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I did feel that it was going to organize itself in that way. And it did.
Do you feel that it's over now?
I think so. The only thing that I might be able to do, although I would hesitate to do it, because I feel very strongly that my commitment included having nothing to do with anything psychic. I feel that very strongly. I think I told you the story of the original commitment in that line. If I didn't, it's in my autobiography, and you'll see it. I think it's through. I do think, and under certain circumstances, I might be able to do this and might want to, if it were very helpful to someone. I think there are questions I could probably write an answer to. But I think I would really want to do that, not as a major part of anything, because I don't think it's very important, but if someone were in trouble and it would be helpful, I might try to do it. I haven't had any occasion yet.
So you continue to hear the voice.
Oh, no, I could ask what to do about something, particularly if the three of us are together. And we would ask, and we would get an answer. We generally get the same answer. If we don't, we'll sort of feel somebody's off a little bit, and we'll try again. But we generally do. According to the course, we should, and everyone could, ask about anything and get an answer. Sometimes it's very surprising to me, and one of the things that I think we mistakenly do is to figure, oh, well, this is unimportant, or this is, or to cut out certain areas from the process of asking, which I'm sure is a mistake, because I don't think we should evaluate. I think you can ask anything. And I would doubt very much if anything is likely to happen to me, it wouldn't happen to anybody else. If he wanted it to. Or if he felt this was the way he wanted to go. I can't imagine that. In fact, I'm sure it isn't true. The course is rather explicit on that.
So you do hear now and then?
I hear whenever I ask.
In other words, at this point now, it's really a matter of asking.
Well, now it's a little more a question of personal guidance as to what to do. We didn't know whether we were supposed to come here, for example, so we asked about that. And we all three thought we should come to California. This was not where we intended to go. And we did feel that Judy sort of came, at a particular time. We felt very much that she was an integral part of this. But we asked for this because I've been very, very careful about this. I am a very careless person in some ways. I lose everything. But I never lost anything of this course. People would stop me in the subway and say, Miss, you forgot your something or other, and hand it back to me. Taxis would honk their horns, say you left something in the back seat. My secretary would say, you sure this belonged in this case report? Doesn't sound right. And it was impossible to lose this course, and I tried. But it sort of kind of followed me around in an odd kind of way. People would send it back to me, anything, and I always got it back. And we never lost anything, which is incredible for me. You have to know me because I really do lose anything. We once went to a game thing, where you had to guess from a one-sentence thing who it was. And somebody said, my God, where is it? And the whole faculty said, Helen Schucman. They recognized it immediately. I'm better now. I think this has been a good experience.
You're the absent-minded professor type?
No more. Now I'm just absent-minded.
Having not heard that in a while, you sort of feel smiling.
Oh, is Judy still with us?
And the sprain, the difficulties, it also for her.
I'm
But
sorry.
I think
I thought Judy was still with us. There was a video playing. That's weird. I love that bit about Helen tried to lose the course. So she had a habit of losing things, forgetting things, and she couldn't lose it. Kept coming back. Amazing. Okay, we're at the end of the evening. Well, near the end of the evening, I mean. So we can take any sharings or any further questions anybody has. I don't know. Dan, do you want to take over and do that? I'm not used to doing this, really. Is Dan still with us?
I'm here, yeah.
Okay, do you want to do the Q&A and sharing? You're the expert.
Let me go to... Okay, if you'd like to have a comment or a reflection on tonight, you can put your hand up and wave, or even better, you could do the reactions button at the bottom and put a hand up. that shows waving. Or Vivian, take yourself off mute. Good.
Oh, Vivian, you still have your microphone problem. We had this before. We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
At all.
Okay.
So
Anybody?
else?
Oh, yeah, it's okay. So, and Angela.
No, I just wanted to say the biggest thank you to all of you Miracle Network angels, because it was such a wonderful evening. I want to use the word magical, but I know that's not allowed. It was a miraculous evening, certainly. And my heart really feels so much gratitude for you all to have such a wonderful presentation from two very wonderful people who brought all of this to us. So a big, big thank you to you all. Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you, Angela. And Ian really got this together. He landed it. He was landed with a situation where it was all set and arranged and booked, and then Judy said, "I've been told by the doctor I can't talk more than 10 minutes." And Ian recreated the whole night and made it a beautiful experience. And I think that's one.
Thank you, Ian, for being such a wonderful producer.
Yeah, that's all.
I spent the whole weekend editing videos and then only used half of them in the end.
Well, that's the right way to go, isn't
I
it?
learned a lot from doing it.
John, would you like to say something? Take yourself off mute. Yeah, you're still muted.
Unmute. How's that?
There you go.
No?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Angela said, really, Ian and all of your colleagues. It was magical. I mean, I think Annie and I were fortunate enough to spend the day with Judith in California. And she's such an amazing woman. There's always a laugh and a smile close to her. She's so authentic. She's so real. And it's such a joy. And it was just like having her in the room. And I have to laugh because when you said the doctor said she can't talk for more than 10 minutes, I thought, you got some hope, doctor. Yeah. She's just wonderful. And it was just a very, very rich evening. And it never seems to amaze me what they all went through, and to know that they all had their the fights between them and all the rest of it. I mean, that's the thing which is not common knowledge, but they had those fights. And, Helen was jealous of Judy. She thought of her as a young daughter, and she phoned Ken up, or Bill, rather, every quarter of an hour if she knew he was visiting Judy. And she said Helen would phone every quarter of an hour, telling Bill he had to get out of there. He'd been there too long. It's just lovely to know how they had all these normal things. So thank you so much for making that possible, and all the technology that went behind it. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Anyone have a reflection or a comment? Jan, we can get you off mute.
I think I'm off it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to say how wonderful that was. And thank you so much. What a gift to be given all this insight, really, into the early history of this, and these, getting a real picture of the characters involved. And Ian, I just want to say it was so lovely to get a real sense of your relationship with these people in the beginning, and how, it was, and how fortunate we are that, you have all that, and you've brought all that, and you birthed Miracle Network. So a big thank you for you, and it was lovely to see that reflected in there. So thank you.
Thanks, Jan.
Okay, anyone have a question or a comment? Or you can raise your hand as the for the chat function. No.
Nobody on the second page. So I guess it's not on. I've got a couple of stories that I jotted down that I quite like to share with you. So we've got a few more minutes, if you'd like those.
Great.
Stories of, well, all of them really. A lot about Ken. I just remember there was a common denominator with meeting up with Judy. Also, I met Bob Skutch once, who you saw on the video, and also with Ken. And the common denominator was cars. Maybe, I guess it's America, so you expect that. But I met all of them in cars. Whit met me. So I think the second time I visited Judy, he met me at the dock opposite San Francisco. You take the boat across from San Francisco to Tiburon, I think it is, or somewhere. And I was waiting in the car park for this car to come with Whit in it, who whisked me off to Judy's. And then, then I met Bob Skutch, who met at the end, that was about 26 years ago. At the end of his drive, he said, we were coming to visit. We had a mutual friend. And he said, I don't know why he didn't want to come to the house. He just said, I'll meet you at the end of the drive. It must have been a long drive, I suppose. I'm not sure. So we stopped on the road at the end of his drive, and then he drove down to us and had a little chat leaning against his car, as I remember. And then Ken, he had a Suzuki Jeep at Roscoe. And I had asked him if he could do an interview, which I was going to transcribe and print up in Miracle Worker, which I did. And I was at a course there at Roscoe for about 4 or 5 days. And every time I saw him, I said, when are we going to do the interview, Ken? When are we going to do the interview? And we finally did it on the very last day. My chalet hut thing was on the road, and I'd see him driving down from his house to the centre every day, or driving home. So on the last day, when we finally did the interview, he turned up in the same little car, this white Suzuki Vitara, I think it's called. And he said, right, we'll do the interview. And so off I went. And that was published in about 1988, something like that. And then the last time I met Ken, well, we went for dinner, actually. This was when they'd moved to California in Temecula. Again, he met me in a parking lot, or car park, as we call it. And we went off to dinner in a Afghan restaurant. It's his favorite restaurant in Temecula. It's not a great choice, perhaps, but that was the one he chose. So I was waiting in the parking lot, the car park, for him to turn up. So cars. Ken had a great sense of humor, and he was always joking. In fact, he very often comes across as being very serious in his recordings and his books. I find pretty dry, wonderful, but very dry in style. But as a man, he was very different to that. He was hardly ever serious, in fact. And over the weekend, I was sitting here thinking about sharing stories of Ken, and I thought about the messages we used to exchange. The letter it was all done by fax. If you remember faxes, and so I'd send off a fax with a question. Part to do with this interview was one example of that. And then a day later, sometimes the same day, I would hear the fax machine whir, and it was the fax coming back from Ken. So I thought, I wonder where these faxes are, if I could find some and read them out. And I picked up a pile of papers, they're still here. And the first thing I saw was these faxes. And here they are. Amazing, I've kept them all this time. And dated 1988, 1998 and 1999, yeah. I know I can find the funny bits. Well, yeah, I felt so relaxed with him in this humor, so I would join in. So I'd sort of tease him as well. And this is this is an example of me teasing him and then his response. It was something to do with the interview, I think. I wanted to reference something. Well, I have no idea what it was now. And he mentioned there was something about it in Absence of Felicity, in his book, Absence of Felicity. So I said, actually, I've only reached page 318 of Absence of Felicity before being distracted onto something else. I hope you will not feel too offended. Please keep writing books. The sunset on the cover is very nice. And so he responded, I don't know why I bother writing all these books for you to read, and I'm trying very hard not to take it personally, nor feel guilty for not writing more interesting book that my English brother would read. All this by way of saying that on page 376 of the Absence of Felicity, blah, 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 he had the answer to my question. Once you read my description, which I must admit is a sneaky way to get you to look at my books, I'm not proud, you see. You may decide, along with me, that it's probably best not to say anything about it. That's a really funny thing. Oh, this is weird. I had a deadline for this interview, so I another fax from me to him, just checking when he was going to be away. But it was in December. I was checking whether he was going away for Christmas, and whether I should get this finish off before that. And is there a deadline? So he said, no deadline. We spend all of December in prayerful contemplation and meditation on the phenomenon of the Course in Miracles groups and networks. He was always teasing me and others, I think, about having groups and networks. But and then with a sideways thing about time, about our fixation on the illusion of time, he said, by the way, do you know what you get when you add up all the numerical equivalents of December, divide it by 15, which is the date of my deadline, take the square root of that number, add up all the digits in the square root, and divide by the number of digits in the square root? I don't either, but I'm sure it's significant, if not sacred. Cheers. Another time I was encouraging to come over to England, I said, we'll take a pub and buy you a pint. And he said something like, well, if you buy me a quart, then I might be tempted to come. So, gosh, I keep those. I think I'm done. It's a serious one, actually. I've noted this down. One of these workshops, I think it's a workshop I referred to earlier at Roscoe. It was about the obstacles to peace. And he'd been talking about the final obstacle, which is the fear of God, right? And I suddenly got this, what he was talking about when you're going to disappear, the ego's going to disappear, right, in that final stage. And I went back to my chalet that I mentioned earlier, lay on my bed and just was thinking about this and suddenly felt terrified, really scared about everything I know was going to come to an end. And then I went off to lunch. We had a communal lunch, and Pamela had the habit of coming down the lunch queue, talking to people as they were queuing. And when he got to me, he said hello, and he said, "How are you doing?" or something. I said, "I'm terrified about what you were talking about this morning." And he said, "Good." I went, "What do you mean good? This is terrible. I feel awful." And he said, "It means you're not in denial anymore." And I knew he was right. And then he just walked off. So I'll never forget that. And it absolutely, that little gesture of just saying, no, you're not in denial anymore, walking off, just left me with it. Just stayed with me. And it was, it's really, they really hit home. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ian.
It's been a wonderful, wonderful evening. I'd absolutely loved it. Felt really privileged to have Judy with us. And
it's wonderful.
Amazing.
Yeah, I feel so grateful that she came and gave us so much. as much as she could.
Yeah. No, she really did. Too much, I think. I was getting scared for her voice.
Yeah, I could.
You got to 11 minutes, 12 minutes. You're going to stop.
So we'll end tonight with. Do you want to do, Kirsty? Do you want to do a thank you, a vote of thanks?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Judith obviously has left now. If she was here, then I would be saying how very wonderful it is to have finally met her, in inverted commas. It's absolutely wonderful to be in real-time presence with somebody who was so close to Helen and Bill and Ken. I remember commenting to Ian a couple of weeks ago that she's like the Ringo Starr of A Course in Miracles. And it was fantastic that she made the effort and to be here, even though, you know, it was, you know, kind of pushing the envelope of the doctor's advice. She was still very much here with us, and it's wonderful. And thank you so much to Ian and to Sharon. I know that you've had very, very short period of time. I think it was just about 2 or 3 days ago that you sent us an email saying that you've had to rejig the whole event because you've just received this news from Judith about the doctor. So thank you, Ian, and thank you, Sharon. For
I have to say, Sharon's been amazing.
Yeah,
They've been really, really on the ball.
you really have, Sharon.
Yeah.
So thank you, and Ian, obviously for your you know, for holding fort tonight, and for, as Angela said, for being such a marvelous producer. So thank you all. It's been a wonderful night. I'll hand you back to Dan.
Thank you. And we'll end with blessings. Put your hands on your heart and send blessings out to this group of people who are gathered here tonight. Let the blessings extend to our course community and out into the world to everyone. Thank you. And take yourself off of mute, and let's all say goodbye to each other.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Lovely to be with you all.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Well done, Ian.